Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode 468 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. It is Wednesday, December 14th, 2022. Duke Blue Devils, all Duke Blue Devils, every Duke Blue Devil that could possibly be playing sports right now is on an exam break. So, of course, we are here to talk about basketball in their absence. I am your host for this episode. I am Sam Klein. I'm joined, as always, by Jason Evans and Donald Wine, and we have a special repeat guest here on the show today. So before I introduce him, Donald, sir, how are you? We've got, as of a few minutes ago, we only have one game left in this World Cup.
Well, we have a final. We have a third place game. That always happens. But the main one that you're talking about is the final. Yes, Argentina, France on Sunday should be an absolute dynamite game. I'm going for France. Sorry, Messi fans. I'm going for France.
All right. Jason Evans is also here. Jason, you don't have to be as tight on your soccer analysis, but how are you?
I'm doing quite well. You should know, by the way, that all week, in fact, for the past 2.5 weeks, I have been the lead writer at CNN International on World Cup coverage. So I may not be as good at it as Donald. He has a few years of practice on me, but I know my World Cup stuff, and I am going for Messi and Argentina, Donald.
Jason, if you need some extra writing, I have a website. I know a guy that can set you up with some credentials so you can write on that.
I'm not taking sides in this one. I've got family from both countries, and so I'm playing neutral for this one. But I will generate chatter. That's my goal. So that should be fun. As I mentioned, we have a special guest today. You have heard him on the show before if you've been around, I think, for a year. He is Brandan Marks. He is a writer at The Athletic. He covers Duke and UNC basketball, but also touches on all things ACC. So we figured, while the non-conference schedule has wrapped up for Duke and has mostly wrapped up for the rest of the conference, and as we head into the ACC season, it would be great to check in with him, not just about Duke, but about all topics ACC basketball, just to take a check of where we are here so far in the season. So Brandan Marks, thank you so much for returning to the DBR podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. That means that I didn't mess up my first appearance too badly, that you guys will have me back. So I appreciate you.
No, our standards aren't that high, man.
No, you're always welcome. Always welcome here. So let's start. I want to get us started with some questions about Duke specifically and sort of your view on them. I wouldn't say you're an outsider. You're as far as you're not a Duke alum, but you certainly attend a lot of the games. You're there a lot, more than we are, more than many of our listeners are. So we want to get kind of your take on what you've seen from the team. So the biggest question, I think, at this point, or it's a two-part question, I suppose, because it's about two players, Dariq Whitehead and Derek Lively II, both of whom were limited early in the season with injuries, who have both returned to the lineup, but I don't think anyone would say that they have looked like the top 5 recruits that they were billed as coming into Duke. So what is your impression of sort of each of their performances to date? And what do you think we're seeing from them, at least in the near term, when Duke returns to play next week?
Yeah, so I think that obviously because they were both injured, we sort of lop them together and consider them a tag team. And we say, both guys were injured, both guys are going through similar processes. And to some extent, that is obviously true. Like, that fact is true. But completely different circumstances in my eyes. And that sort of colors my perception of each guy. So, in the case of Derek Lively, for instance, we're talking about an injury that was, a calf injury, kept him out, 3-ish weeks. He only missed one actual game, has slowly been working his way back, but, had the bulk of the summer, had the bulk of off-season workouts with the team, did have a lot of that, time that, on the other hand, as we're talking about Dariq Whitehead, he did not have. A much more serious injury, an actual broken bone. I actually have had the same exact injury that Dariq had. I broke that same bone in my foot during college, and I was out about 8-9 weeks in a boot and everything.
Are you sure you didn't go to Duke?
Yeah, sure? Exactly. And it's not fun. It's really painful. And there is lingering pain, especially after the games. Or for me, there was lingering pain for weeks, even after I was quote unquote cleared. So I think you're talking about two dramatically different circumstances, especially considering how much time Derek missed. I mean, he missed a full 3 months, missed multiple games, basically did not get to practice with Tyrese Proctor before the actual start of like live ongoing basketball. So my perception of them is different, and that's a long-winded way of saying it. But basically, I remain higher on Dariq Whitehead than Derek Lively because of that. I think that a lot of what we've seen from Derek is sort of what he is. He is an athlete. He is a rim runner. He puts pressure on the rim in pick and roll situations. He's a lob threat. All of that is true. I think the lack of an interior game is very much him. I think, he's not going to be a Ryan Young. He doesn't have post moves. I don't think that we're going to see him, develop into this real 3-point threat. He was a pick and pop guy in high school, not really a pick and roll guy. I don't know that that's really in his bag at this level right now. And so I think with him, you're talking about being a lot closer to the finished product than you are with Dariq.
So really quickly, because we haven't had someone on the show who has had the exact same injury that one of our players has had, thus the quip about you probably playing for Duke basketball at some point in your career. But that's a great point, right? Like how in your mind, obviously your pain is not what Dariq has been experiencing and vice versa, but take us in the mind of someone who has had that injury. What qualities were slower to come back than others? Was it like, some people maybe apply pressure a little bit differently? Is it something where you just need the confidence, kind of like an AJ Griffin last year, just needed to have the confidence that you could, do something the way that you did before? What is that like, having that injury and returning from it?
Yeah, I think for AJ, it was a little bit of a different situation because he had a longer history. For Dariq and for myself, it was sort of, a one-off deal. And again, I am absolutely not, I think Spencer Hubbard has me beat in a height advantage. So I'm certainly not a basketball player.
Dude, that's a deep cut. Spencer Hubbard, way to go. I like
it. But I will say this. I think the thing for me that took the longest time was even when you do go back to working out and to running and to doing all those things, you do still have like a lingering awkwardness, and it is heavier and you are less nimble on your feet. And, obviously Dariq waited longer to sort of come back, and with his future, that makes a lot of sense. But there is lingering pain still, it is sore the day after games and things. And that's not even taking into account the fact that while you're, rehabbing and recovering, like you can't be working out to the same extent. So the conditioning factor is huge there. The last thing that I would add is that I think for Dariq specifically, given his skill set and the way that he likes to play, the foot is a particularly tough injury because so much explosiveness depends on being able to generate force and explosion out of your feet. That was his best attribute in high school and as a prospect. And so I think that's why we're maybe seeing it take a little bit longer for him to, get back to the explosive slasher that I think a lot of Duke fans anticipated he would be.
So this Duke team, Brandan, doesn't have a Paulo Banchero or a Zion Williamson, the type of guys who are coming in and able to dominate the game for long stretches. But it does feel like night to night, Duke has featured a lot of different weapons, guys who can score in different ways, make a big impact in different ways. So knowing that and seeing them so far this season, who do you think is Duke's go-to player down the stretch in games, for the rest of this season?
Yeah, I think that, ideally you have one guy. Like last year against Texas Tech, against Arkansas, you give the ball to Paolo Banchero and you clear out the rest of the floor and you get out of the way. That's a great luxury to have. I think that it's going to be somewhat matchup dependent this year. But I think the two guys, number one at the top of the list is Jeremy Roach. He's going to get every opportunity to make those shots. He's going to have every opportunity because I think with Jeremy, you have there's an array of ways that he can beat you. He can beat you driving the basket. He can get to the free throw line. And especially of late, he's proven that as a scorer, especially from deep, he has some semblance of consistency. So I think that he's going to get every opportunity. But let's say he's having an off game or somebody else has the hot hand. Could I see it being Kyle Filipowski? Absolutely. 100%. I think he's, right there in that same tier. The guy who I don't know, it sounds weird for me to even say it, but I do think that there are going to be a lot of like late game situations where like Mark Mitchell has opportunities. And I don't think that's anything that anybody expects, but he has just been so aggressive attacking the basket. He's been so good at getting fouled. When he gets playing downhill, he's really tough to stop because of his athleticism and his size. So I would say Jeremy and Kyle are obviously the two front runners. Maybe Derek gets to that point at some point this season, but Mark, when he gets going late in games, as we saw, I think what was the last one? Boston College, maybe, where he got going late. It's one of those things where he's like a runaway train once he gets going.
I've got to follow up on that. I wonder who do you think are going to be the starters on this team once Derek Whitehead is more up to speed? Because I was sort of thinking, I mean, Mark Mitchell's been pretty inconsistent. I was thinking Mitchell might be the odd man out, but I'd love to hear your take on that. Oh, and maybe the answer is, by the way, that Derek Whitehead never starts. I don't know.
Yeah, I could see it going multiple ways. I think there's a couple ways Jon plays this. Either A, he keeps things as they are, brings Derek off the bench, and Derek is sort of your second unit scorer. And I think that can be really impactful. And, you've seen a lot of consistency from this starting group so far. So not wanting to mess with a good thing, I understand. At the same point, I could see him switching that out. I could see him going for, Derek instead of Mark and bringing Mark off the bench. I just don't know I don't know if having Jalen Blakes and Ryan Young and Mark on the floor at the same time is necessarily, and Derek, I don't know if that's necessarily your best lineup combination. You're lacking a lot of shooting there. I think this very well could be a fluid situation. I think as we saw over the last month of last season, and obviously Trevor Keels' injury had something to do with it, and then Trevor's play late in the season had something to do with it. But from February on, we basically had two starting lineups, and they came in specific segments, but you had the lineup with Roach in the starting lineup, and you had the lineup with Keels in the starting lineup. I think you could see a similar situation to that, where there are times where it's Mark, times where it's Derek. The thing that I think a lot of fans want to see is Derek Lively coming off the bench and running like a Roach, Proctor, Whitehead, Mitchell, Filipowski, all offense unit. I think a lot of fans are intrigued by that. I don't know that you have the defense that you need there, and I don't know that you have the rebounding you need there. So we'll see. I think it's going to be a fluid situation. I don't think that Jon is really settled, and to some extent, it depends on what Derek looks like when he gets to be fully formed.
Brendan, you talked about Kyle Filipowski a lot in the last one, and I feel like Filipowski has been the biggest revelation for Duke this season. He came in as a top 10 recruit, certainly a guy with a lot of hype given his high school ranking. But in the preseason, we heard a lot about how he wasn't necessarily keeping up with the rest of the team, how his adjustment period might have been longer. And until this week, he had won every ACC Rookie of the Week award to start the season. So how has his performance sort of defied the expectations the way that you thought about it prior to the season? And sort of what are you expecting from Filipowski the rest of the way? He's close to being like averaging a double-double at this point.
Yeah, he's been insanely productive. So I get so many questions about the preseason with him, and people, I think there was a pretty notable podcast that he caught some flack on, saying he wasn't keeping up. Do you know who it reminded me a lot of? It was a lot of the same stuff that I heard last summer about AJ Griffin. It was a lot of the same stuff in terms of this kid's good enough. He just has to pick it up. He doesn't understand what it takes yet. And I think that for Kyle, there was a little bit of a welcome to college experience those first couple of months. I think you'll see some players have it during the season. Some players have it, maybe a year in. His was this summer, and it was those first couple of weeks. And I think that, I asked him after a game a couple of weeks ago, what was the thing that surprised him the most about his performance so far this season? And he said, it's the consistency that I've been able to do it with, because there was all this hype about me, and then there was anti-hype about me, and I just am sort of playing. And so I think for him, he realized over the summer, I'm good enough. I just have to put in the work to be good enough. And, this is a guy who maybe wasn't coming from a situation like, Mark, for example, is coming from Sunrise Christian. That's like a college prep high school. That is, he's playing against Grady Dick, another, his roommate is another future first rounder. So I don't know that Kyle had that same experience. And so I think there might've been a little bit of a splash of cold water in terms of dude, these are the expectations when you get here. In terms of his game, he's been so much better than I thought he was going to be. And I before the season did not think he was a one and done guy. And I think at this point it's pretty clear that he's going to be. especially defensively. He's just been so much better in space than I thought he would be. And that was the major concern that every scout I talked to, everybody who came through practice, everybody who saw him at the high school level, on the AAU circuit, that was the thing they were all concerned about. Like, if this dude is going to be a 4 at the next level, can he defend 4s? Because that's what he is. He's not a 5. He is a 7-foot stretch forward, which is what makes him so tough, because he does have some post skills. I think I've just been really, really impressed by him as much as anybody on the team. And, we did a college basketball roundtable with our national staff a few weeks ago. And I said he's been, as revelatory to me as any player that I've seen in person so far this season, outside of Edie, who is a beast.
Right. Certainly. And you got to see him as well up close. So we, right after Kyle Filipowski committed to Duke, we were talking to him on this show, and he said he expects to be a multi-year player. So it's possible he was lying to us.
I know that there were a lot of opposing coaches who thought over the course of the last year that he got the quote unquote Duke recruiting bump. If you talk to coaches around the ACC and other coaches who were in the mix recruiting him, assistants and whatnot, and they were all like, especially when the talk was coming out this preseason, it was like, well, if he'd come here, he'd be starting, he'd be our star. And then it has, they've quickly let go of that talk.
One more question on this Duke team, and then I think we're going to transition to talking a bit more about the program, as it were. But we've noticed one major change, I think, that Jon Scheyer has made this year, and not clear yet if that's a Jon Scheyer is still tinkering or this is his style thing, is that he's using the bench a lot more than we're used to Coach K doing, especially in recent years. He has not trimmed the rotation yet, and is still playing with a lot of different lineup combinations. Some of that may be injury related, as you say that, Whitehead is still sort of recovering. Roach was out in the last game, but what are you seeing in Scheyer's use of the bench and the way that he's kind of going a lot deeper than Duke fans are used to?
Yeah. And there are, quantitative metrics to back that up. So, about a third of Duke's minutes per Ken Palm are coming from the bench right now. They're in the 50th percentile nationally. So, dead even average in terms of bench scoring. So, it is a legit factor to this team. And I think it's intentional. And I think that it's going to endure for the course of the season. I don't think that it is necessarily endemic of the way that Jon is going to play every season. But the thing about Jon that I think a lot, if you just talking to people in the basketball industry before this season, the belief among some people was that in terms of a coach, someone who is making decisions, someone who is calling specific sets, who is adjusting to their personnel, there were some people who thought that he would be something of an upgrade over maybe what we had seen the last couple of years from Mike Krzyzewski, which sounds blasphemous. But I think you have seen him do a really good job of adapting to fit his personnel, which is the fact that he knows he doesn't have a Zion. He doesn't have a Paolo. He doesn't have one of those guys. And he needs to go 8, 9, and as he saw against UMES, 10 deep to be able to make the most of the talent that he's got. And so I think that when you're talking about this Duke team, the beauty of it is not that the starters like last year were an NBA starting 5. The beauty of it is that, it's not quite Kentucky 2015, but you can almost platoon. You can almost roll out 2 entirely different starting 5s, and the malleability with the roster. I mean, the starting lineup the other night was gigantic. You can also go super small, and you can have a Roach, Blake's, Proctor 3-guard look if you want. So I think that him using the bench is some level of experimentation still. I think that'll continue, but I expect the bench to be a major component for most of the season. I really do. Maybe that changes next year if there is if Mackenzie Mbako comes in and is, bang, he's one of those caliber guys. Maybe that changes, but Jon has done a really good job of fitting his style to his personnel so far this year, and that's what I think the bench represents.
Brendan, don't worry about blaspheming the end of the Coach K era. We hold nothing sacred here. We're totally progressive in that light. One more question about this team that as a follow-up to that, and then I want to hand it to Jason. How many games are Christian Reeves and Jaden Schutt going to play in ACC season?
I think that Jaden will play in more than Christian. And I, to be honest with you, don't totally understand the staff's decision to burn Christian's red shirt in the first game of the season. I was a little curious about that myself. I think
we have not yet gotten the explanation on that satisfies anyone's wondering about it.
No, and you won't. I think Jaden will play in more, and here's the reason why. Jaden has the thing that Duke doesn't have. Jaden can shoot the ball. And, I don't think that he's going to be hitting step back threes against, the top half of the ACC. But do I think that he's a guy that could hit 2 or 3 a season? I do. Or a game per season? I do. And, I was actually talking to a scout the other night, and he was likening the situation to another team that I cover and to Kerwin Walton from a couple of years ago at North Carolina. I don't know if you guys remember him, but basically he comes in, didn't play at all until the end of December of his freshman year, comes in and starts hitting at a 42% clip. And Roy Williams is like, hey, I got to play this kid. If Jaden is doing the same thing, I think we could be talking about a similar situation where he, forces Jon to reevaluate just how deep he's willing to go.
All right. So Brendan, I'm taking over now. And sort of the theme we had was that Sam was asking more individual player questions. We got off of that a little bit. I'm going to ask you mostly big macro team-wide stuff, and also some stuff related to Jon Scheyer, although you kind of already answered it. And then Donald's going to do the ACC. So let me start with this. Scheyer said in the preseason and early in the year that he thought this could be a special team on defense, that this team's identity was their defense. Do you think they're living up to that promise? Do you agree with that assessment that this team begins on the defensive end of the floor?
100%. And I will say, when Jon, I think the first time that he told me and a couple of other reporters this was in June, he was like, we're going to be a defense first team. And we were all like,
yeah, right.
Okay, good luck, buddy. Because he had 11 newcomers. He had 7 freshmen. And the continuity that they play with and the cohesiveness defensively is crazy. I try not to really lean too heavily on Ken Palm's metrics this early in the season in terms of overall offensive and defensive efficiency, because they're skewed by last year's data. But there's a site that I really like called CBB Analytics, and they have Duke in the 91st percentile nationally right now in terms of defensive rating, allowing 91 points, out of 100 possessions. So it's real and it's legit. And, I think that the game that sort of told me that it was viable for that to be this team's identity, and it's going to sound wild because they're not the best team Duke has played, was the Bellarmine game. And it's because the way that Bellarmine plays offensively, they're, sort of Princeton offense to a hyper degree. There's no ball screen coverages you have to deal with. There is no dribbling where you can poke the ball away from a guy. The on-ball defense is different. It's all about continuity and understanding movement and communication. And Duke did a really good job of navigating those screens and passing guys off. And sometimes it was verbally, sometimes it was Jeremy Roach shoving Tyrese Proctor to the other edge of the court. But it worked. And so I think that told me that this could be a foundation of this team. And that's what we've seen so far.
All right, so let's go to the other end of the floor, because they've struggled on offense. There've been some games where this team couldn't throw the ball in the ocean. What is going on there, and what can be done to make it a little bit better?
Yeah, I think people are a little bit overly critical. The defense is clearly further ahead than the offense right now. The shooting is not great. I don't know that this is going to be a great shooting team over the course of the season, but I think people are panicking. And right now, Duke is averaging like 9.2 points per possession overall, which is not bad. That same website I was just referencing, CBB Analytics, has them in the 83rd percentile of offensive rating. It's not as bad as people think. It's been inconsistent, and it has shown up poorly in certain games. I think the Purdue game really did a lot to sort of sour people's perceptions of what everything was.
Dude, Oregon State, that was terrible.
Oregon State set the game of basketball back 5 years. I don't disagree with you. But I think the thing that we forgot then is that it's a work in progress, especially with those injured guys, because Derek is never going to be a key, fulcrum of the offense, but the rim pressure he provides is real. And when teams have to worry about tagging him on the backside, it's going to open up cutters, which is why I think Mark Mitchell has started to come on so strong. It's because that's what Mark does best. And that's where there are some gaps that he can take advantage of when Derek is spacing the floor and pick and roll. Derek can be, I thought Derek was going to, before he was injured, I thought he was going to be the leading scorer on this team. I still think he has that kind of offensive upside.
So did we.
if he gets back to full strength, there's no reason he can't be that guy. So I think it's about continuing to integrate. And when you're trying to, ease some of those pieces in, it's not always pretty. I know Duke had its COVID situation sort of around this time last year, a couple of weeks after this. And that coincided with reintegrating AJ. Then it coincided with Trevor getting hurt, a couple of weeks after that. There were some rocky offensive performances in there too. I think the thing that you've seen, if you're a Duke fan offensively, is you've seen that Jeremy Roach is playing, in my eyes, maybe not every single game at that NCAA tournament level, but certainly at the most consistent season-long pace of his career. That's incredibly encouraging. Kyle Filipowski has been a do-everything guy. He's in Ken Palm's top 10 player of the year ratings. He is a do-everything stretch forward. He's going to continue to get better. Ryan Young has been the best YMCA pickup of all time. He is number 4 right now in the country in terms of offensive rebounding. I don't know if that endures through ACC play, but even if he's a top 25 guy in that respect, Duke found an absolute gem in picking him up in the portal. Tyrese Proctor is, I think, learning the feel of the American game, and talking to some people in Australia, there are real adjustments that you have to make coming over here. So there's a lot that's still in the hopper, so to speak. And so I think if you're a Duke fan, it's about understanding that it's going to be a process, and this maybe doesn't look what you want it to look like until February. There are going to be flashes, but I think it's going to take that long to find the consistency because of so many moving pieces.
I think it's easy for Duke fans to sort of remember the losses. I mean, we lost at Kansas. No shame in that. It was a game that they led until late. But Duke fans just aren't used to the kind of beatdown that we saw against Purdue. But on the other hand, this team does have some nice results. I mean, wins over Xavier, Ohio State, Iowa, those are all really good wins, especially because they weren't all home games. They were neutral court games for the most part. So give me a letter grade on this team thus far. I'm interested in hearing where you think, I guess maybe relative to expectations, how you think they've done.
Relative to expectations is the interesting thing there, because quite frankly, I thought Duke was going to struggle more than it has to start the season, because I didn't think the defense would be anywhere near what it is. I thought the defense was going to take a couple of weeks to get to this form. So I'd give them probably a B+. And I think, you like you mentioned, that Iowa result is going to age really well, even though Murray may or may not be out for a couple of games with an injury. Same thing with Ohio State. I think that one's going to age well. Sean Miller and Xavier, that's a good team. Those are 3 tournament caliber teams. You'll take those in the non-conference. And the Kansas game, it's not like it was a blowout. It was a game that Duke was leading in the last couple of minutes, and then Kansas goes on a run. Oh, wait. It's the defending national champions with a national champion point guard and a guy in Jalen Wilson who looks like he's going to be an All-American. It was also their 3rd game of the season. So I think there's some grace there. The Purdue game is different. The Purdue game was a beatdown. I think the thing that was so frustrating there was Edey is going to get his. And you didn't stop the other guys from doing their damage. You let them both have it. And that's what Jon said after the game, was we let Edey get his and we let everybody else get theirs too. And I think that was a real wake-up call for this team in terms of what it is going to take against some of the best teams in the country. Purdue is the best team I've seen in person so far. I think that, UConn is probably right behind them in terms of teams I've seen live. Alabama is, can be really good. I know they've had some injuries and Amari Burnett's out now. But Purdue is the best team I've seen live, and I think they're a worthy number 1 team in the country right now. There is no shame in losing to the best team in the country. Nobody expected Duke to be that right now, and I don't know that anybody really expected Duke to be that this season. So I would say a B+. You would have liked to have maybe seen a better response at the end of the Kansas game. You would have maybe liked to have seen some better offense in some of those slogs like the Oregon State game. But look, Jon Scheyer is finding ways to win games, and he's finding ways to win games with an incomplete and a constantly shifting rotation. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. I am really impressed, and I know a lot of people are impressed by the job he's done so far.
That kind of rolls me into my last question, which is, it's a combination of what you just were talking about. Give me a letter grade on Jon Scheyer, and then also talk to me a little bit about how, you had this gig when Coach K was there. Compare what you're seeing from the 2 programs, the Coach K-led Duke program and the Jon Scheyer-led Duke program, and talk about the differences. But start with your letter grade on Jon.
Yeah, I think I might even give Jon an A-. I think he's been that good. I think, I really cannot emphasize enough how impressive what it is that Duke is doing defensively. Their coordination for having so many young pieces has been stellar. Him getting, I don't know that Kyle Filipowski was defending that well in space before Jon got him, and I think that there are still guys who can take strides. I think that Tyrese can take strides, and you have some built in, terrific defenders who he had. Like Mark was always going to be a terrific defender. Jalen Blake's in the flashes we saw last season was a terrific defender. Maybe a little foul prone, but a good on-ball defender. Jeremy Roach has shown the ability to be a pickpocket, to be a pest on defense as well. So you had good pieces. Lively was obviously known for that coming out of high school, but the connectiveness has really stood out for me. And also offensively, I think he's doing some creative things. Duke has run a lot more open sets. They're running a lot more 5 out. He's done some different things in the pick and roll. I've asked him a couple of times about, his screen setting. They're running a lot of horns actions with Jacob Grandison as one of the screeners. I think that's a really interesting dynamic because it opens him up off of certain actions. So I really like what Jon has done. I think that this is a team that, like, if you told Duke fans before the year that this was what the first 12 games of the season were going to look like, but that the arrow would be pointed this far up, I think a lot of them would have taken that. And, looking at the national landscape, even and the ACC landscape, which I know we're going to hit on here in a little bit, I think Duke's arrow is pointing up as much as anyone's too. And considering where they're already at, that really says a lot about the job he's done with this team already. In terms of the program, it's looser. It's more open. I've been to multiple.
Oh boy, believe me, I know how close the program was under Coach K. We all experienced it.
Yeah, and not saying that Jon is inviting me in to watch video post game, but there's a lot more accessibility, and I think with that there's been a lot more understanding. I think there's been a lot more getting to know the players and why things work the way they do, and I think that sort of openness just really works well for everybody. The other school I cover, it's been a little bit of the opposite situation where maybe it was a little more open before than it is now. So it's been interesting.
Really?
Yeah. So it's just been interesting for me to sort of see the difference in how every coach approaches things. And, but, for Jon to be as, I can tell you one thing, Duke was not letting assistant coaches from other programs come to its preseason practices when Coach K was there. So it's been very different in a positive way.
All right. We are going to take a quick break. On the other side, Donald is going to get us into a discussion about the rest of the ACC. Stick around.
So, Brendan, we want to shift now from Duke to the rest of the ACC. You obviously covered Duke and UNC quite extensively, but you also get to see the entire ACC through that. So just to start, what has surprised you the most about how the season has gone thus far for all of the teams in the ACC?
Yeah. Well, I am an unabashed and shameless ACC homer. I want the ACC to do well. I want my teams to do well.
Amen, brother. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes my job a lot easier when the ACC does well. And I think that the ACC has good basketball. And I thought it was going to be better this year. And it has probably been there have been more challenging and more threatening teams than I thought there would be at this point already in this year. I thought that Virginia would be good. I didn't think they would be this good. I thought that Duke would struggle a little bit. They've been better than I thought they would be. I thought North Carolina would struggle a little bit. They certainly have, but they are starting to pick things up. I don't think Virginia Tech has played its best basketball yet, and they've got a number of nice wins already. Miami has gotten a couple of nice wins and production from Nigel Pack. NC State looks like it might be able to, depending on how the schedule shakes out, be in contention for games that matter in February. So, Clemson looks good. So I think there's a lot of teams in the ACC that just really help the strength of the league. You hate to be in a situation last year for Duke and for everybody else where you've only got one shot to improve your resume. For Duke, it was, we have no opportunity to improve our resume. What we did in the non-conference stands for itself. We can only go down. For every other team, it was, this is our one opportunity. Otherwise, none of our games really matter. It doesn't matter who we win or we lose to. We can explain it away. I think it's just a much healthier top to bottom league. And, obviously Louisville is, emphasizing in red ink, the bottom of it. The faces you're all making are kind, given the way that they've played.
We'll talk about them in a minute.
Yeah, but the ACC top to bottom, I think, has just been in a lot better form than it was obviously this time of season ago.
I mean, you mentioned a few teams, right, that I think all of us have said have exceeded expectations. At this point right now, are some of these teams you mentioned, the Clemsons, the NC States, the Virginia Techs of the world. We know Duke and Virginia are probably slated to be in the NCAA tournament if the tournament was today. But what about some of these other teams in the ACC? What their early prognosis of being in that tournament?
Yeah, I think there are right now probably 4 teams that I would feel comfortable saying are like definitely going to make the tournament from the ACC, and it's Duke, North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia Tech. I think there's no question that all 4 of those teams are getting in. And then it's sort of a matter of how do things shake out. I think NC State has a real chance. I really do. I think NC State has a real chance to sneak in. I think Clemson, depending on how things break.
Hey, have you looked at Clemson's schedule? Because in the preseason, I was talking about this. Clemson's schedule, there's no easier schedule in terms of the conference schedule, just how it randomly shook out for them. I'm with you. Clemson's going to be a contender.
They are, and I think PJ Hall is one of the best big men in the league. And I had concerns that he was not going to be healthy this early on, or at least not as effective as he has been. And then he goes out, and I think that Wake Forest game was sort of like the, I'm back game from him. And so I think they have a chance. Miami, I would say Miami's probably at the top of that next in list. Like I don't think it's guaranteed they get in, but most likely they will. So if I had to say right now, I'd probably say 6 teams from the league make it. I'd take those 4. I would take Miami, and then I would take probably one of Clemson or NC State. I don't know that both of them are going to get in, but that's how the ACC should be. And there are going to be some of those bottom feeders, and maybe Wake Forest picks it up and goes on a run. I think that Steve Forbes is one of the best coaches in the league. Maybe that can happen. But I'll say right now, I would say my early prognosis would be 6 teams.
And do you think that, the fact that obviously the ACC Big Ten Challenge had his last year this year, the ACC won that challenge, which always is something that the ACC as a conference can then say, oh, you think the Big Ten is the best conference in the country? Well, our teams beat them in this challenge. Does that help them? At least some of these teams that might be on the bubble down the road.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we learned last year the value of the non-conference. We learned that, it is great to have done, it's great to do well in conference play. It's great to win 13 ACC games or whatever like that. 14 ACC games. You're making the tournament. That used to sort of be the sort of language we use. And now we're seeing like, look, the non-conference slate matters that much. And really what it does is it impacts the starting point for conference play. It impacts what conference play it can be worth. And so I think the ACC has done a much better job, like I said, of sort of positioning itself to where, there are going to be January conference games that matter, and they're going to be late January and February and deep into March. There are going to be conference games that matter. And that's how it should be. And it's not just for the Dukes of the world. It's not just for the North Carolinas of the world. It's going to be for everybody. And that I think is going to bring out the best in teams versus, maybe at the end of last season, you didn't quite see that from every ACC side.
You just talked about some of the teams that have done well and teams that could factor in at the end of the season. What about some of the players that could factor in for postseason awards, especially the All ACC and ACC Player of the Year?
Yeah, totally. So, I think we mentioned one of them, PJ Hall at Clemson. We'll sort of see what the consistency looks like in conference play, but certainly he's going to be a guy that is going to be on the ballot for All ACC. He's one of the best, most complete offensive bigs in the country, can do a little bit of everything, can hurt you, outside of the paint, obviously has an array of post moves inside, can rebound the basketball. He's a guy I really like. Trying to think who was actually on the All ACC preseason. Terquavion Smith at NC State. I think enough said about him. He's a pro. He's a pro. Like he is as good as everybody says he is. I thought he was going to lead the league in field goal attempts this year, and that backcourt is special. I mean, that's one of the better backcourts in the league with him and Jarkel Joyner. I don't know that Joyner is good enough to get there individually. The old staples down at Miami. You've got Isaiah Wong, Nigel Pack. I don't know that enough people are going to be familiar with Nigel Pack to give him his flowers, but he's already hit a game-winning shot and is producing at a pretty high level.
He was first team all Big 12 last year. How can we ignore him?
I think and that's the thing that I'm so interested in about the transfers, is like seeing who gets their flowers in that respect, because I don't know that all of them are going to. At Virginia, there's a number of guys, but we'll see. I hope Reese Beekman is not hurt. Reese Beekman to me is he looks like an all ACC first team guard right now. At North Carolina, Armando Bacot, preseason player of the year. I think he's still performing at that same rate. He's going to, barring injury, in sometime in conference play, he's going to set North Carolina's career rebounding record, which is crazy. He's already got their all-time double-digit rebounding game record. He's going to get the double-double record. He's going to average a double-double for his career. Like he's a guy who is probably going to have his jersey retired there, or honored, not retired. So those are a lot of the guys that you look at. Trying to think of some others who are really good. Virginia Tech. Didn't talk about Virginia Tech. Justin Mutz. It's crazy to me that Sean Padula is a name that I'm throwing out here, but Sean Padula, he's playing that efficiently. I got a fun Sean Padula story, if you guys will briefly indulge me. Last year in the preseason, and I like doing these at ACC Media Day when I have the time. I didn't this year, but I went around and I asked every, player that I could find a set of like 5 or 6 questions. Who's the guy you most would want to play with in the league, not on your team? Who's the coach you'd most want to play for? What's your favorite venue, et cetera, et cetera. And for most underrated player, I got a lot of like Isaiah Wong and, DeVoe at Georgia Tech. And I got 1 vote for Sean Padula. And I was so perplexed that I went back and looked at the ballots, and this was clearly a ballot done by Sean Padula, because he had put himself for every single award.
That's hysterical.
Hey, bet on yourself.
And Sean Padula bet on himself. And I have some neighbors who are huge Virginia Tech fans, and they thought that story was hilarious. But they were also like, hey, don't write him off just because of that. And so now just seeing him like actually do that is pretty cool. I would say, I think at this juncture, it's going to be a stiffer competition in the front court than the back court for all ACC, because between Hall, Bacot, Filipowski, Mutz, Jaden Gardner, just off the top of my head, that's a lot of really good guys. John Hughley.
It'll probably come down to some, 1v1 matchups as those teams play throughout the season. Hey, I want to shift gears to UNC for a moment. They started off as the preseason #1 team in the country. I went off to the World Cup and they decided to lose every game until I got back. So they're now out of the polls, but what do you think is going wrong there so far this season?
Yeah, well, they've won their last 2 games, and I think are starting to right the ship. But the biggest thing is for as subpar a shooting team as Duke has been, Carolina is worse. North Carolina has regressed in a major way shooting wise. And this was my major concern for them going into the season. It wasn't just that you were losing Brady Manick in terms of his efficiency. You were losing him in terms of his quantity. By the end of last season, over Carolina's last 13 or so games, he was averaging 10 3-point attempts a game and hitting at a 45% clip. Like, there is no 1-for-1 replacement there. And Pete Nance has been a nice addition. He's a guy who has hit multiple threes, I think, in 3 of their 11 games. So, 1 in every 3.5 games or so. But he's not the same kind of, quick trigger, I'm shooting as soon as I get the ball, catch and shoot guy that Brady was. And Caleb Love and RJ Davis have both regressed, and they're not seeing a ton of production from their bench. And so because of the lack of 3-point shooting, their offense had no spacing. Defenses could hard hedge them in every single ball screen situation, could double the guards, could make life difficult. And so now what you've seen in the last 2 games and has improved their points in transition, has improved their points in the paint, has actually improved their 3-point percentage because they're getting more efficient looks, is they're playing through the post more, and they're playing through a guy who was an All-American last year. What a novel concept. And so you've seen them be much more efficient. You've seen their rebounding numbers be better, their free throw numbers be better. They're catching and then kicking back out. And sort of like with Duke, both of these teams are built to be inside out teams rather than the other way around. Duke figured that out, 3 weeks before North Carolina did, though.
So we've talked about the top of the ACC. We've talked about the best players in the ACC. Let's go down to the bottom. So we're talking about clubs like Louisville and FSU having just terrible seasons right now. FSU 3-9 so far. They are 1-1 in the ACC. Louisville, joins Cal as the only
Wait,
two teams.
they're 1-1. They're 1-1 because they beat Louisville.
Hey, a win's a win.
A win's a win.
But Louisville joins Cal as the only two teams in Division I basketball to have not won a game yet this year. So we talked about, the top, that's what's going well for the people at the top. What's going so poorly for those guys at the bottom?
Florida State is slightly more explainable in my eyes. They've had injuries. Baba Miller suspended, which is the grossest suspension and the most unfair thing the NCAA has done in like the last 20 minutes, because they're always doing those sorts of things. That kid should not be sitting. But so they've had some injuries. And here's the thing, like when you think of Florida State at its heyday under Leonard Hamilton and the 2020 ACC champion Florida State Seminoles, who didn't actually get a chance to go and see what they would do, it was a defensive team. These were long teams, 9 guys, 6'4" to 6'7". They were going to grind you out. They were going to take you out of your actions. They were going to make you just sort of freelance. You weren't going to be able to move the ball. Your assist rate was going to go way down. Like, they were really going to make your life tough defensively. And the last couple of years, they have slowly slipped from that perch. And I don't know if that's an intentional pivot to try and incorporate more offense from Leonard's part. Obviously, they brought in a couple of one and done guys. They brought in a couple of 5-stars who some have panned out maybe more than others. I thought Matthew Cleveland was going to take maybe more of a star turn than he has. But you have seen that defensive identity deteriorate, basically. And as a result, you have a team that's not great on offense. You have a team that isn't stout and doesn't take you out of your actions defensively anymore, has had a couple of injuries, has had some roster instability. And so I think that one's a little more explainable. Sadly, I do think this might be the last year that we see Leonard Hamilton coaching in the ACC, which, this to me is the first time that Leonard Hamilton, I think, has looked tired or has looked his age. I hope I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong. I'm wrong frequently. This would be a great case for it, but that's sort of my read on that situation. And then in terms of Louisville, oh my God, it's just a flaming pile of trash. It's horrible. Every part of it is bad. And
don't sugarcoat it. Tell us how you really feel.
If they don't beat FAMU,
they might not win a game.
I don't know when they're going to win a game. And it's a situation where it's not, and a couple of my colleagues, Sam Vicini has done a couple of podcasts about this. We've talked about this in our college basketball roundtables. It is not just that they are horrifically eye gouge worthy bad on both sides of the floor, especially offensively. It's that it looks like they have no plan. I do not know what they are trying to do schematically. I have no idea. They have no guards. This is a team that at least has some size. It has some rebounding. Play through them. If you can't put the ball in the hole from behind the arc, stop trying so much. And so I just don't understand what the directive is from Kenny Payne. I don't understand what the strategy is. Again, they have no guards, and yet they keep trying to play through their guards. It's getting to the point where it's like, I never thought we could have asked this question even before the season, but it's getting to the point where you have to ask if they go like 2-38 or 2 and whatever, if they win 1 or 2 games, do you pull the plug after year 1? And I think
it's almost unfathomable.
It was truly
a guy that was this touted, but you're right. I mean,
and not only that, but he took one of Duke's assistant coaches. Nolan Smith is there on the bench having to live through this in addition to all those guys. So.
Sam, there are Duke fans that think if things keep on going south, that if Kenny Payne gets the boot early, that Nolan may get a shot right now.
They would promote somebody who's currently on this coaching staff to lead the thing.
Yeah, I don't
know.
I don't think there's any chance that Kenny is let go before the season. He's too beloved. He's too valuable there as a basketball icon. So I don't see that happening, but it's gotten to the point where, like, if it is truly that bad, and the recruiting that was supposed to be sort of the hope that you could sell to fans during all of this has not been there, does not look like it's going to be there. I do think you have to at least ask that question, which I never could have even considered, 3 months ago, but that's how much of a disaster it has been there so far. I hope they turn it around.
Wait, hold on. They've got a couple 4-star recruits. They got a couple top 100 recruits for next year. They don't have a 5-star stud. which I guess probably Kenny Payne and Nolan Smith, you sort of thought you would, but it's not like their recruiting's terrible.
You struck out big on DJ, which is the tough one.
Right.
And Caleb Foster has signed a different NLI. Sorry, I get NIL and NIL all mixed up, but he's not going there. So yeah, it's a tough situation, and I think it's really unfair. I'm generally someone who's like, give them a couple of years, like, let them figure it out. I think, sort of what we're seeing from Capel at Pitt this year is proof of like, maybe that does work sometimes. And I think that it can, but I don't think Louisville should ever be this bad with its resources. And it's sort of tough to even get your arms around that disaster. It is a hot mess.
It's been abysmal to actually watch. And I think it's one thing to be like bad at the sport, but to make it where it's unwatchable, that's the key here. Cause that's where people, especially, their fans and their alumni bases, they're not tuning into these games. So that's the real key here. But I want to get you out of here on this question. We're looking at the ACC, but on the national scale. Over the summer, the talk was all about, the conference realignment and, teams moving to what would not be a traditional conference for them. The Big Ten gaining some teams, SEC gaining some teams, Big 12 and talking about gaining some teams. Have you heard any rumblings lately about ACC teams, and how do they feel as a whole about the future of this conference?
The ACC still feels no. I think we're on a pause, and
thanks for joining us, Brandan.
and the ACC has not been involved for a reason. It's because if somebody was going to challenge the Grant of Lights in court, they would have done so already. And the fact that they haven't, with the number of high-paid lawyers that they command, I think sort of tells you a lot about it. Eventually, it's going to get to a point where there's a cost-benefit analysis, and it's going to be financially feasible and respectable and make a whole lot of sense to leave the ACC and leave some guaranteed money on the table and bolt. But we're just not there right now. And right now, until that I think is the thing. Everyone gets so caught up in like, oh, are we going to be an SEC or a Big Ten team? Until that grant of rights, until you get to the point in terms of number of years that the grant of rights is worth getting out of, it's really hard to consider that teams are going to do that, because the ACC is going to put up one hell of a fight. I think the conference moving its headquarters to Charlotte is a step that you don't take if you're, about to splinter apart. And I haven't heard anything from anybody about any continued movement. Of course, these things work in the shadows, but that grant of rights has been pretty ironclad. And I think that, if I can say a message to listeners, like, that is the thing to watch. Do not fall for the rumors. Do not fall for the hype. None of that matters because of the logistics that the grant of rights, sort of present in terms of keeping things together.
Do you think it holds them together for like 4 or 5 more years?
It's going to get to a point where the money makes more sense to leave once you get to per year distributions that are so large that like the money you'd be getting is going to offset like what you would be basically relinquishing to the ACC by leaving. 4 or 5 years, maybe. Again, I'm speculating here now at this point, but I think you're probably talking about like 8 or 9. I think it's going to take that long because the grant of lights does go for so long.
Well, I think that's enough time for Mike Elko to catch the same lightning in Dabo Swinney's bottle to allow Duke to, rocket to the top of the football conference the same way that Clemson, it feels like, arbitrarily did the last 10 years. So with that, Brendan Marks, and with that bit of optimism from me, we'll let you go here. Thank you so much for taking the time again to speak with us. Always good to have you on and to get your perspective on Duke and on the rest of the ACC. So we appreciate it, and hopefully we'll talk to you again sometime down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, y'all, and enjoyed it.
All right, guys, another great conversation with Brendan Marks. As we were saying on his way out, we love having him on. It's always good to get insights from someone who, watches the games as closely as we do, but comes at them from a slightly different perspective, a slightly more professional perspective, if you will.
Yeah, there's some terminology. Just sometimes he's talking about, the way teams run sets and things like that I'm just like, damn, that guy knows who he's talking about. He's not just winging it.
Look, I just want everyone to know out there that big pile of trash is an industry term. So So that's good.
Yeah, poor Louisville.
Poor
We have not
Louisville.
talked enough.
Oh, man. Can you wait? Can you imagine if we were doing the LBR, the Louisville Basketball Report? Man,
No, I can't.
It would be
I
tough.
can't imagine
It
that.
would be really rough. Man, that
I don't have a response to that. It's
it's a
horrible thing.
dumpster fire.
I will say, for Duke fans that are gloating about it, there was always a chance that Duke was just going to, promote some alum into the head coaching position and that things would not go well. I know I have said it 100 times this year, but be grateful that this Jon Scheyer thing is working out as well as it could, and that Duke lucky. The Duke today is not Louisville. The Duke today is not Georgetown. The Duke today is not a lot of schools that have brought alumni back as head coaches and that are, regret to different extents.
UNC under Matt Doherty.
Absolutely.
Ugh. Yeah.
So
I remember them days. But
I was going to say,
interesting,
Sam,
right?
I actually think that perhaps the most interesting stuff to me of what Brendan told us was the praise for Jon Scheyer. It was laced throughout the entire conversation, was how impressed he is with the way Jon Scheyer's brought this team together, especially on defense, and how much he feels like, this isn't the same program. I think there were a lot of people who thought, okay, it's the guy who's been by Coach K's side for the past decade. It's someone who knows what Coach K wants to do. We'll just roll along doing the same kind of stuff. And what you heard from Brendan and what we've seen is that Jon Scheyer is sculpting this in a new way, and it's proving to be very successful. And for a guy like Brendan, who is objective, not a fan, no blue tinted glasses like we have, for him to have this kind of praise for Jon Scheyer, I think is very significant.
I also think, just the fact that we as Duke fans, we have high expectations and we have high standards, and we kind of, approach our team with a little bit more scrutiny than the outside world may do, right? The fact that he was like, hey, yeah, we thought you were going to be a little worse, but like the fact that that he was super surprised at how our defense has come along so well, about how Jon Scheyer has coached so well. He gave our overall team performance a B+, which, look, I don't know many Duke fans that would say, yeah, absolutely B+. We probably would grade ourselves a little bit lower because we had those high expectations. But I think what Brendan just taught us here is pump the brakes, kind of, take a step back and really appreciate what we have seen through the first 34 days of the season.
Maybe
he said the arrow is pointed upward on this team as much as any team in the country. That's exciting.
Donald, maybe it's that I didn't average a B+ when I was at Duke, but I had set my expectations low for this team. And I know when we talked in the preseason, we were guessing win totals and stuff. And I said, this is going to be a harder adjustment, I think, than most Duke fans were realizing. It has gone better than I expected. I think I was probably sort of in line with where Brendan was saying he thought Duke would be at this point in the season. And I'm pleasantly surprised. I am surprised that despite all of the injuries and despite all the new faces on the team, that this team has, a pretty decent idea of its identity without Dariq Whitehead playing 30 minutes a game and being the go-to scorer. So I think Brendan sort of brought the hopefully the level of sanity that we were looking for.
Yeah, and you know what, we can call this cautious optimism, right? We can be proud of what we've done so far. We can be cautiously optimistic about the rest of the season, because we're going to be entering ACC season. We obviously have had one game so far, but for the most part, our young guys and our young coaching staff is going to, for the first time, endure what ACC season is like. We all know what it's like as a fan. These guys are going to go through it for the first time. The rigors of having, again, every fan base being against you and knowing your squad very well. But also, as Brendan pointed out, there's a lot of guys in the top half of this ACC who are also doing well and surprising on the season. So we're going to have some close contests. We're going to have some tight battles, and we as a fan base should continue to be ready for that.
No, Donald, I'm saving my unbridled optimism for Duke football. If they can go 8-4 in
Got
Coach
my tickets
Elko's first year, I'll see you there. By the way, if Duke could go 8-4 in their first year under Mike Elko, man, the sky's the limit. College football playoff in, I don't know, 2024, 2025, maybe. It might.
Look,
I guess
look,
it might take him a little time to recruit, but it feels like he could turn that around real quick.
Look, you were joking about it. If this Duke team starts consistently winning 7, 8, maybe 9, or even occasionally 10 games in football, suddenly Duke is a way more attractive part of the conference realignment that's going to happen 5, 7, 8, 10 years down the road.
I'm not holding my breath for it. It would require the attendance to pick up and the TV ratings to pick up. And I don't know.
But wins bring fans.
Wins help that.
No question about
Wins
it.
help that.
Yeah, as I said, look at Clemson. I don't even know if you could call them a middling program prior to their, to their appearance on the national stage.
They were pretty good back in the 80s and early 90s. They were
losing to us in the mid 2000s, and nobody lost to us in the mid 2000s.
So in any event, guys, we have gone on too long today, especially given that there's no actual basketball to talk about. So we're going to leave it there. We will be back before the Wake Forest game to preview that one. We didn't want to spend time on that here in case more news comes out either about Duke or about Wake in the days leading up to that one. So thanks again to Brendan Marks for taking the time to speak with us. Of course, read all of his coverage at The Athletic. I think we'd all agree that he is one of the best guys out there covering Duke basketball on a daily basis. And don't forget to email us, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing the questions. And certainly for the next episode, we will have less to talk about. So if you have questions, now's a good time about the team, at least. Now's a good time to send them in. So for Jason Evans, for Donald Wine, I'm Sam Klein. This has been episode 468 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Duke Band, take us home.
I'm gonna fill up my water real quick. If you'll just give me like 30 seconds, I'll be right there.
Don't worry about it. It's a smart man who fills up his water before doing a podcast.
Says the cougher.
Yeah. Hey, when you get to be my age, you're lucky you can still speak.
No, I was in the dentist chair this morning, and I got like a pretty bad cough in the middle of it because you're in the dentist chair. Right. Then you feel bad because you're like, oh, I'm just like coughing right at you, but they're wearing that huge shield, so
it's also like clockwork. Like they're like, all right, open wide and try to stay still. You're just like,
yeah, try to stay still while we're digging your mouth apart. While we're,
by the way,
performing paleontology on you.
Coughing has become a whole different thing in the past couple of years. Like I used to cough and not think that much about it. Now, if I cough and I'm like within earshot of anyone, I'm like, I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm really
like I'm a horrible person. I know.
Or if you hear it, you're like,
who's
that?
Exactly.
Right.
Who is that?
Yeah, every cough is evil now.